Alright, hello everybody. Welcome to our last kind of lesson here in this chapter about equality in different cultures and stuff like that. So today we're going to look at different cultures in the US, talking about counterculture and things like that. So our objectives and standards are to understand the counterculture that emerged in the United States during the Vietnam War, and to analyze responses to the different culture and lifestyles that occurred during the times. And take a moment there to read the standards if you would, please. And our desired result: what was culture like in the United States during the Vietnam War? So while many voiced their opposition to the Vietnam War, others sought another way to show their disapproval. The counterculture evolved in the 1960s in the U.S. as a way to challenge the Vietnam War and other injustices such as civil rights or, the environment, caring for the environment, and things like that. And many followers of the counterculture turned away from traditional American values. Many of them wanted to create a society that was based on peace and love. So the beginning of the counterculture, how did this all start? Members of this new movement, frequently called hippies, which you may know that word as well, had many views of the new left. They believed that the United States was based on a couple of things that made the United States kind of uh, wrong and difficult. Materialism, such as focusing on making sure you had the nicest clothing and the newest car and the newest TV, technology, and also war, especially the Vietnam War. In the 1950s, the Beat movement, which we've talked about already, had expressed nonconformist views, or views that went against the common views of everybody, and its beliefs helped hippies accept this new way of life. Harvard psychology professor and counterculture philosopher Timothy Leary urged young Americans as well to basically, go against what their parents were telling them to do, and to basically go out and live their lives and be who they wanted to be. And because of this, many youths left schools, they left their jobs, and many of them left even their homes in an attempt to create a society of love, peace, and harmony. Now, this way of lifestyle had rock and roll music, clothing that was outrageous. Like, I'm sure you've seen some of, if you Google hippies, and you've probably seen some maybe like Halloween costumes of people in hippie costumes, sexual independence, and also different illegal drug usage as well. Now, followers of the movement also turned to different religions as well, such as Zen Buddhism, to help them find enlightenment and meditation. Their appearances ranged from tie-dye clothing to military garments, Native American jewelry, and many of them had very long hair, especially the men typically wore their hair longer as well. Some left behind the traditional way of living in a home for communal living, such as living together in one home or an apartment, or living together outside in like a campsite or a campground type thing. And one of the big locations of the hippie capital of the world was the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood in San Francisco, California. A few years later, though, as quickly as this kind of hippie counterculture movement had came to rise, came to power, the movement kind of turned into violence and problems. Obviously, people living together in one home sometimes can be very chaotic, very claustrophobic, and things like that. So even though they practiced peace and harmony, it turned into more problems. Many people began to, unfortunately, begin to live on the streets. Again, there were arguments over living in communal lifestyles, and many unfortunately became victims of drugs or mental illness. And the members of the counterculture soon turned to the government, which they had resisted and kind of been against the government and don't go to the government for help. Well, many of these people now turn to the government to help them, whether it be money, food, mental or health illnesses. So again, as quickly as this counterculture movement kind of came to power, it quickly begins to decline as well. Now, the counterculture did bring about some different changes in art, music, and popular culture. In art especially, we begin to see popular art, also known as pop art, by artists such as Andy Warhol, began to appear. We also see a change in the music in the counterculture. Famous musicians and bands, such as the Beatles and Bob Dylan, were very popular with the youth and teenagers. And in August 1969, there was a massive outdoor music festival in upstate New York that attracted more than 400,000 people and expressed love and peace. And this event was called the Woodstock Music and Art Fair, and it lasted 3 days. You may have heard of Woodstock before, but it did last about 3 days, and it did have a big cultural impact on not just our country, but other countries as well. We also begin to see many movies, television, and books begin to address issues involving sex and violence as well. So the reaction to the counterculture movement. Many Americans began to grow fearful over the ideas of the counterculture, obviously kind of, living with strangers, drug and other different types of things going on, not having a job, and kind of, people kind of just kind of roaming the streets or roaming around the country with no real kind of sense of purpose, basically, sometimes. And this really kind of worried a lot of people, especially a lot of people who we consider conservatives. And many people who were conservative in the government and in the country began to express their displeasure at this way of life. A Republican candidate for President Richard Nixon and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover warned against members of the movement as well, saying that these people, were obviously maybe a drain on society, or didn't belong in society, things like that. That's what a lot of their views were. So as many Americans began to voice their opposition to the views and lifestyles of the counterculture, many more Americans are going to move towards a more conservative approach. So while many Americans had kind of been a little more leftward leaning in the, early 60s, throughout the 1960s, as we come towards the end of the 1960s, going into the 1970s, we begin to see Americans move away from the Democratic Party a little bit, and more so towards the Republican Party, and that will lead to the rise of Richard Nixon as president. Alright, so what was culture like in the United States during the Vietnam War for Americans? Think about the counterculture, think about maybe the opposition to the counterculture, and that will help you answer with your question today. Alright, so have a great rest of your day or night, and talk to you soon.